Welcome to the Scandinavian immigration presentation. Not a Spike Lee joint. There's controversy over who was the first European to land in North America. Some people say it was Christopher Columbus, but the History Channel says that a fellow named Bjarni Herjolfsson, that is the correct pronunciation, first saw North America around the 11th century after he was blown off course while sailing across the sea. He ended up telling some kid named Leif Erikson the story, and the Erikson family just happened to be full of explorers. About 15 years later, Leif took Bjarni's boat and landed in what is now called Newfoundland. Just in case you were wondering what the F Scandinavia is, it's made up of Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden. I'm going to be focusing on Sweden in this discussion because I drove past IKEA the other day. Long before the massive immigration began, but after the Viking explorers, some wealthy Swedish explorers set out to discover new territory in America and start some colonies, and that was in the late 1600s and into the 1700s. Later on in the 1800s, the people over there started getting tired of their governments restricting religious diversities, and there was also a lot of wealth inequalities, and that led to wars in their regions. And people also wanted to own land. You know, America had jobs available, and eventually their countries were just getting overpopulated, and it led to famine, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, why America? Immigration policies were favorable at the time. The people started coming over because it was the place to be. There was jobs, there was land, you could create your own laws, and nobody would tell you what to do. It was really a pretty cool place to be at the time. So they came over, and they started developing colonies and stuff like that. Sport Christina was the first Scandinavian settlement in what is now the United States, not North America in general, just the United States. It ended up getting swallowed up by larger expanding cities, and Scandinavians kind of spread out across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and then further west out to Minnesota and Wisconsin, Michigan, and North and South Dakota, and eventually over to the Pacific Northwest and down south the West Coast and into Oregon and California. They ended up, a lot of them ended up staying centrally in the Midwest, but some Scandinavians ended up liking the Pacific Northwest because the rugged coastlines and the forests reminded them of home. So when they got here, many Scandinavians they were leaving because there was overpopulation and there wasn't enough land available, so it was just getting too hard to find a place to stay. In the 1850s and 60s, the overpopulation reached a point where it actually led to famine, and the government started to relax their immigration policies to allow citizens to find new homes. Over 150,000 people immigrated to the United States in a 20-year period from 1861 to 1881. This is the whole Fort Christina thing, and that's just a map pretty much of everything I already told you, all the places that they settled. It started over here in the East Coast in the Delaware region, and then they moved through Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and then they headed west into Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, the Dakotas, Washington, south, down into Oregon and California. They were received well enough when they first got here. There was a lot of work available. The railroads needed labor. They were building tracks. The government needed a lot of people to go and live in really far out and remote places in order to stimulate economic growth in our territories. At first, the U.S. immigration policies were favorable for all of the immigrants. They could come here, they could find jobs, they could buy land. It was good. Eventually, the U.S. got overwhelmed. There was just too many people coming in at once, and they eventually, in 1924, they passed the Immigration Act, and that restricted the number of Scandinavians or immigrants in general, like for not just Sweden but Scandinavia, to like 1,000 or 2,000 a year, and that number has never changed. So they did 150,000 immigrants came to America from 1861 to 1881, and it kind of slowed down after that, but they still kept coming. And then by the time 1924 came along, the U.S. government decided that they needed to cut it off. How did these policies affect assimilation to the nation? It seemed to strengthen their heritage. They formed communities and they stuck together. They elected Swedish officials to office who were always keeping the best interest of the Swedish constituents in mind. They created hospitals if they weren't if the ones that were available were not up to their standards. They created schools. They created social clubs. They even printed and read their own newspapers. At home, most Scandinavians were living under less than suitable conditions. There was a large inequality of wealth. The government didn't really mind that was happening, and there was a lot of social unrest because of it. Eventually people started starving to death because of famine, and in America there were a lot of companies looking for workers. There was jobs available, there was land available. They could practice whatever religion that they wanted to, so it was basically everything that they were looking for. You can still see evidence of Scandinavian culture in family names, schools, hospitals, and even log cabins, like the corner notched log cabin where they cut the ends of the logs off was a Scandinavian design, and that was widely used across America and even still is today for some very wealthy people who build new cedar log homes. They formed Swedish Hospital. Dr. Nils Johansson. He came over here and he wasn't satisfied with what he saw in American hospitals, so he decided to found his own. I've been to a Swedish hospital, and I was triaged, x-rayed, seen by a doctor, given a prescription, billed, and wheeled out to my car in literally about 20 minutes. That was at Swedish Hospital in Issaquah. So if you're ever in a hurry, I'd recommend you go there. You ever heard of IKEA? I know their furniture doesn't last very long, but that's good for business. They came over, most of them were very literate when they got here in their home languages. They could all read and write and speak their language, which was more than most of the English, or the early English and the early Spanish settlers could say for themselves. So they created schools to continue that, or to keep that culture. They took pride in being educated. They were very hard workers. They played a very big role in developing the infrastructure of our country as far as building train tracks and communities are concerned. They had a really strong belief in human rights. They did not believe that slavery was right, and at a large, vast majority even of Scandinavians in general, not just Swedish, ended up siding with the Union, and they fought voluntarily in the Civil War to abolish slavery. So volunteering to fight in a war is, just because of your cultural beliefs that you need to treat people with equality, is a pretty powerful impact, in my opinion. And that concludes my presentation. These are my sources: history.com, Wikipedia, libraryofcongress.org. I hope you enjoyed listening to my monotone voice, and have a nice day.